There is a place in southeastern Turkey that is forcing archaeologists to ask again a question that once seemed to have an answer. When did human civilization truly begin? More than 11,000 years ago, before writing, before the pyramids, before cities, and when humans were still believed to have lived in simple hunter-gatherer groups, strange stone structures appeared at Karahan Tepe. Not just a few rocks scattered across the ground, but rooms carved directly into the limestone bedrock, T-shaped pillars deliberately raised into place, and human faces carved into stone, as if they are looking back at us from a lost world. What is difficult to understand is this. These people left behind no writing to explain who they were, what they believed, or why they built this place. But what remains shows they were not as simple as we once thought. So is Karahan Tepe just another ancient site? Or is it the trace of a forgotten stage, when humans had already learned how to build, organize, perform rituals, and create symbols long before official history began? When people mention Karahan Tepe, they often immediately think of Göbekli Tepe, the famous site that once shook the way we understand the beginning of civilization. But Karahan Tepe does not only raise the question, is it older than Göbekli Tepe? The real question is much bigger. What if Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated phenomenon? What if, in this land, more than 11,000 years ago, there already existed an entire network of communities that knew how to build, gather, perform rituals, and communicate belief through stone before humans had writing, cities, or states? In that case, Karahan Tepe is no longer an isolated ruin. It becomes a sign that history may still have a very large chapter that has not been read correctly. Who created those stone spaces? What made them invest so much effort into a place that went far beyond the daily need for food and shelter? Were they leaving symbols for their community, for their ancestors, for the divine, or for a way of understanding the world that we have lost the ability to decode? And if a society without writing could still organize, build, and create such complex symbols, then where does the line between prehistory and civilization truly lie? Perhaps Karahan Tepe does not only force us to ask who built it, it forces us to ask something much larger. How much earlier did human beings begin to become complex than history has ever admitted? Imagine you are standing on the limestone hills of southeastern Turkey more than 11,000 years ago. What lies before you is not a lifeless land, but an ancient world breathing. Wind moves through the cracks in the stone. Wild grass sways under the low sun. In the distance, the calls of wild animals echo across the valley, while small groups of people move slowly with the seasons, following water sources, following paths that only memory could preserve. Then, on the slopes of Karahan Tepe, everything begins to change. There, people are not simply building shelters for the night. They are cutting into the bedrock, creating rooms sunken into the earth, raising T-shaped limestone pillars, and building round spaces as if they were meant for something more important than daily survival. When night falls, flickering firelight touches the stone walls. Animal carvings appear and disappear through layers of darkness. A human face emerges from the stone, silently staring into the empty space, as if it had been waiting there long before names, writing, or history existed. The people who entered this place may not have felt like they were walking into a structure. They may have felt like they were crossing a boundary. Outside was the world of hunting, cold wind, animal tracks, and long days of searching for food. Inside was another kind of space where the community gathered, memory was passed down, and invisible things were given form through stone, fire, and shadow. To us, Karahan Tepe is an archaeological site. But to the people who once stood there, it may have been a place where the world was explained, where ancestors were remembered, and where their most sacred stories were preserved without a single written line. Karahan Tepe, therefore, is not only the trace of an ancient settlement. It is like the remaining doorway to a world humanity once understood very clearly, but today can only touch through stone. For a long time, we often told the story of civilization in a very familiar order. Humans learned to farm, Then they settled down. From there came villages, rituals, social classes, and large structures. But Karahan-Tepe makes that order no longer so simple. Because the people who created this place lived at a very early time, before agricultural society had fully developed, before writing was born, and before the first city appeared. And yet, they already knew how to do things that went far beyond the daily need for survival. They could gather people, divide labor, work with limestone, raise large pillars, create communal spaces, and leave behind symbols that we still have not fully decoded today. This does not mean Karahan-Tepe was a lost empire. Nor does it mean the people who built it had kings, palaces, or a state system like later civilizations. But it shows something more important. Humanity's collective imagination appeared very early. Before there were cities, they already knew how to gather around a shared belief. Before there was writing, they already knew how to place meaning into carvings. And before recorded history existed, they already knew how to turn communal memory into stone. Karahan-Tepe, therefore, does not break history. It only forces us to understand that history is deeper, more complex, and that ancient humans were far more intelligent than the old image once suggested.
Karahan-Tepe is not only intriguing because of the questions it raises. What makes this site even more special lies in exactly what archaeologists have found beneath the layers of earth and stone. This place is located in Şanlıurfa province, in southeastern Turkey, about 29 miles from the city of Şanlıurfa. Karahan-Tepe was first identified in 1997, but it was not until 2019 that systematic excavations truly began. Since then, pieces of an ancient world have gradually emerged: carved bedrock, T-shaped limestone pillars, round communal structures, stone benches, stairways, and many traces of everyday life. One of the large structures here is about 75 feet in diameter. Part of it was carved directly into the natural bedrock, while other parts were built up with stone walls. This shows that ancient people did not only make use of the landscape, but also knew how to turn the ground itself into part of the architecture. In another structure, archaeologists found the image of a human head emerging from the rock wall, with upright stone blocks placed in a special arrangement in front of it. This space is believed to possibly be connected to rituals or some kind of communal function that we still cannot fully understand today. But Karahan-Tepe does not only contain traces of ritual. There are also grinding stones, handstones, mortars, pestles, and tools connected to everyday life. These discoveries show that people did not simply come here for a moment and then leave. They lived, worked, gathered, and left behind many different layers of activity on the same land. It is this combination that makes Karahan-Tepe important. It was not simply a sacred place, nor was it only an ancient settlement. So what did the people of Karahan-Tepe truly know? First, they knew how to turn stone into architecture. They did not simply pick up existing stones and place them next to one another. They knew how to choose limestone, shape its surface, form stone pillars, and use the natural bedrock itself to build intentional spaces. That required more than strength. It required experience, planning, and a kind of knowledge passed down within the community. But their knowledge was not only found in construction techniques, they also understood that space could change the way humans feel. A room sunken into the earth makes a person feel different from standing outdoors. A stairway forces the body to slow down. A low room makes the voice echo differently. A face carved into the rock wall makes the eye unable to look anywhere else. Karahan-Tepe, therefore, was not only built to exist, it was built for people to enter, feel, and remember. And deeper than that, they knew how to use symbols. Human figures, animal forms, stone pillars, hands, bodies, and rooms beneath the ground may once have carried meanings that were very clear to the community at that time. Perhaps they were stories about ancestors. Perhaps they were rites of passage. Perhaps they were a way of explaining life, death, and the invisible world around them. But today, we no longer have the key to fully read those signs, because they left behind no writing. What they knew once lived in stories, rituals, memories, and gestures passed from one person to another. When that community disappeared, much of that knowledge disappeared with it. That is what makes Karahan-Tepe so haunting. Not because ancient people knew nothing, But because they may have known a great deal, we just no longer understand the language they used to preserve their world. It appears to be the point where everyday life and the symbolic world intersected, where humans were both trying to survive and creating spaces to remember, believe, and connect with one another. Karahan Tepe did not leave behind a clear ending. There is no text telling us why this place was abandoned. There is no inscription naming the last people who ever stepped into it. Nor is there any story explaining how the final ritual took place. All that remains are traces in the earth and stone. Some structures at Karahan Tepe appear to have been deliberately filled in after use. This is very important, because it suggests that this place may not have ended in a sudden disaster. Perhaps it was an intentional act, a way of closing a sacred space, a burial ritual, or a sign that the community that once lived around Karahan Tepe had moved into a different way of life. Over time, the environment may have changed. Food sources may have shifted. People may have migrated elsewhere. Settled farming communities may also have gradually replaced older forms of gathering and ritual. But the important point is this: we do not yet have enough evidence to say that Karahan Tepe collapsed because of war, disease, or some violent event. Its disappearance may have been much quieter. Not a single day when everything ended, but one ritual after another stopped being repeated. One room after another was filled in. One story after another was no longer told. And finally, a world that once meant so much to the people there slowly faded beneath layers of earth and stone, until only silence remained. What makes Karahan Tepe haunting is not only its age of more than 11,000 years. It is the fact that this place may once have been very sacred, very familiar, and very easy to understand for the people who built it, but for us today, almost all of its meaning has been cut off. A room that may once have been a place where the community gathered is now only called by an archaeological term. A carving that may once have made ancient people immediately understand what it meant has now become an unanswered question. A face carved into stone that once looked toward living people now only looks at us from a world that has lost its voice. And that is exactly what makes Karahan Tepe go beyond the scope of an ancient site. It forces us to think about ourselves. If a world that once had its own beliefs, rituals, memories, and symbols can disappear until only stone remains, then what guarantees that the modern world will be understood correctly thousands of years from now? Perhaps people in the future will find our cities, highways, satellites, data centers, concrete, and plastic. But will they understand why we built them? Will they understand the fears, desires, love, loneliness, beliefs, and stories that we once placed into our world? Karahan Tepe quietly reminds us of one thing: being preserved does not mean being understood. And sometimes, the first thing to disappear is not the structure, it is the meaning that once made that structure important. Karahan Tepe may not prove that a lost super-civilization once existed before Göbekli Tepe, but it reveals something far more important. Göbekli Tepe was not alone. If Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, and other sites in the same region all carry traces of large-scale architecture, ritual, and symbolism, then perhaps we are not looking at an isolated phenomenon. We are looking at a wider world where early Neolithic communities began to change the way humans lived together. They were no longer only moving with the seasons to survive. Some groups had begun to stay connected to one land for longer, gather in shared spaces, and create structures that went far beyond the need for shelter. Inside those stone rooms, the memory, belief, fear, and stories of the community were preserved through something more durable than spoken words: architecture. That is the truly thought-provoking discovery. Civilization may not have begun with a city. It may have begun in the moment, when humans stood together in a shared space, looked at the same symbol, and believed there was something larger than daily survival. Before there was writing, they used carvings to leave meaning behind. Before there were historical records, they allowed memory to live in rituals, in stone, and in the way the community repeated its stories. And before there were temples with clear names, they built places that would force future generations to return and ask questions. So what disappeared at Karahan Tepe may not have been only an ancient settlement. It may have been an entire way humans once saw the world, a worldview strong enough to be carved into stone, but fragile enough to be silenced by time. A face still remains imprinted on the rock wall, no longer belonging to any living person, yet still seeming to look out from the deepest part of the past. Beneath the layers of earth that have covered it for thousands of years, rooms that may once have echoed with footsteps, the crackle of fire, and the voices of gathered people now lie still in darkness. On those limestone hills, Karahan Tepe still exists like a buried piece of humanity's memory, with no writing to explain it, no story to guide us, and no surviving names to tell us what truly happened there. All that remains is stone, carvings, underground spaces, and a silence that has lasted for more than 11,000 years. It is that silence that makes this place so haunting. It does not answer us, but it keeps forcing us to ask what the people who built Karahan Tepe once understood about life, death, community, and the invisible world, something time has made humanity forget how to read. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and see you in the next video.